Hey, Wally Adamchik with Nothing Builds Itself, and today we're going to talk about one assessment that we see out in the real world, assessments in construction to help with your self-awareness. This one called FIRO, developed by a guy by the name of Will Schutz after World War II. FIRO, Fundamental Interpersonal Relationship Orientation. Like any assessment, it can be used for career development, to help you with job satisfaction, improve your team effectiveness, and help you understand your strengths and weaknesses from a leadership perspective. And within FIRO, there are three categories, I'll call them. The first one is inclusion. Now, inclusion is exactly what it says it is, right? So here we are as a team. Here I am, you're over there. Do I bring you in? Do I include you in the conversation or not? I mean, how many times have you been brought onto a team and you were kind of like, nah, you're over there, you're the freaking new guy. It's like the old war movies, don't talk to the new guy. Well, this is about getting the new guy in, right? And from a psychological perspective, this determines the extent and contact that we have with people and the prominence that we ascribe to somebody else. So this is one of the first things that we think about when we're creating new relationships. Words like belonging, recognition, involvement, participation are all part of participation. Now let me give you one more word with inclusion. Significance. When I include you, you feel significant. When I hold you out, you feel insignificant. So, what one do you think is a better motivational strategy? Making people feel significant or insignificant? Right, so there's deep psychology here on the FIRO and inclusion. And by the way, some of us are more inclusive than others, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But this first part of the FIRO, inclusion, is about making people feel significant or insignificant. Am I in or am I out? The second part of FIRO is control. And this relates to decision-making, influence, persuasion between people. It's really about power and dominance that people seek, right? So this, if you're familiar with the concept of forming, storming, norming, and performing in teams, this is where the storming really begins to kick in, right? Because this is where conflict happens, and we figure, well, who's in charge here? And we start throwing our chests around and posturing and those kinds of things. And words like power, responsibility, authority, consistency are the ones that come into play. And one more word for you here as it relates to control is competence. If I perceive you to be competent, I will not seek to micromanage you. I will not seek to control you. Flip side, if you perceive me to be competent, you will allow me to manage you. Maybe not control you, but you will certainly allow me to exercise authority over you. If you perceive me to be incompetent, you will not let me control you. Similarly, if I perceive you to be competent, I will not micromanage you. So that's the second level of FIRO. The third level of FIRO is affection. The need for affection relates to the emotional ties and warm connections between people, right? It determines, are we, just acquaintances at work, or are we friends at work, right? Consensus, openness, support, personal ties are all the words that come into this affection or likability piece. There are people that I work with that I don't like. Well, you're going to have a level of performance there, but it's not going to be at the highest level. So we've talked about significance, inclusion. We've talked about competence and control. We've talked about likability and affection. And by the way, you don't need to take a FIRO to be thinking through these concepts here. But then there's another layer to it, and it's this concept of expressed versus wanted. So there's what I show, and there's what I really want. So for example, I may show that I want to be included, but I may not want to be included, or vice versa. I may demonstrate that I don't want to be controlled, but I really want to be controlled. Clearly there's a lot of deep psychology going on in here, and goes back to a mama's house story. But and it's when there's a disconnect between these expressed versus wanted. It's kind of like this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You're showing one thing, but you really want another. And your people are looking at this going, well, what's up with this guy? Why is she being like that? Well, it's not a conscious decision. It's this disconnect that we have in us sometimes that says, here's what I want, but here's what I express, and it can be very confusing to people. Let me give you an example of how this might work. On a scale of 0 to 9, and they're all measured on a scale of 0 to 9. 0 being, I have no interest in this. 9 being, I need this high in my life. Inclusion, significance, right? Another way it's been said is, how big is your circle? Well, I score fairly low on inclusion. Although I consider myself to be a good leader, and people have said that I was a good leader, the inclusion piece says my circle is pretty small. In fact, a buddy of mine says, a professional colleague says, Wally, for me to be in your circle, I need to lose weight. Now, once you're in, you're in. I'll give you the shirt off my back, but it takes a lot to get into my circle. And I, as a leader, need to work to extend my circle so that people feel like they're in, so they feel significant. I didn't know this early on, but as I learned it about myself, I said, yeah, it takes a lot for people to get into my circle. So if you're in my team, if you're on my direct team, you are already kind of in the circle. But anybody else outside the circle, you're dead to me. I didn't care. And I've had to learn that I need to have a larger circle to have a greater degree of influence. So, as it relates to FIRO, this thing, Fundamental Interpersonal Relationship Orientation, founded by Will Schutz, inclusion, which is about significance, control, which is about competence, and affection, which is about likability. And what do you express, and what do you really want? This is an interesting way of looking at yourself and can really help with your self-awareness and make you a better leader.